Live by the sword, die by the sword. This time on Poll Hub, when the Dow Jones is skyrocketing, Donald Trump has been more than happy to take credit. But after several historic drops, crickets. What might this mean for one of the only areas a majority of Americans have given him some credit for? We'll talk about it. Also, the crazy, wonky battle over the 2020 U.S. Census. Crazy, wonky, but also incredibly important, since vast amounts of money and huge swaths of public policy depend on accurate counting of who lives in America. And the count only happens once a decade. Why could asking one simple question, or not asking it, raise so much ire? All that, plus what people are worried about with the Winter Olympics being held in one of the world's most dangerous political hotspots. Busy day. Let's get started. And hi, everybody. I'm J.D. Dapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Marigoff, Director of the Marist Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
Donald Trump loves the stock market when it's going up, but he doesn't tend to say much about it when it's going down. A lot of presidents, have been somewhat reluctant to take credit for the stock market because they know what goes up must come down. And Donald Trump has been a little unusual in that regard. In fact, in his State of the Union address, it was only a couple of minutes in that he said this.
The stock market has smashed one record after another, gaining $8 trillion and more in value in just this short period of time. The great news for Americans, 401k, retirement pension, and college savings accounts have gone through the roof.
So that's his State of the Union. The market has not stayed up since then, though. It has dropped quite a bit. But his economy, guys, is one of the few things that he's been above 50% on, right?
Yeah, in fact, I think it's the only thing, and it's been periodically less or more, but in any case, it's the one that he's been able to, no pun intended, bank on. And in this instance, we're seeing a very volatile stock market, certainly, during this week. And, it raises, some questions of just political smarts, but ultimately, should you be tying the economy to the stock market as the president has done, and that may not be the right strategy.
Well, and there have been some political operatives and administration people from previous administrations who have said just that the stock market is not the economy. And I think one of the reasons why the president and certainly his administration is very interested in connecting their policies with the success of the stock market as it has been running, or connect themselves with the economy, is most of the polls, including the latest ABC News Washington Post poll, has shown that most Americans basically think that the economy is either in excellent or good shape. And this is really the first time we've seen these kinds of numbers in a couple of decades. So we're seeing really a positive opinion about the economy among most Americans, with jobs and unemployment being very low at this point in time. So it makes a lot of sense for this administration to be connecting themselves with what is the most positive thing that people are thinking.
But there's still some convincing to do, because a lot of people think that the Obama administration, these are not people currently in the White House, but the Obama administration is the one to receive the credit for the economic situation right now. But what's happened this past week we have a new head of the Fed. There's concern at the market about interest rates and about inflation. We certainly have seen a pullback of some sorts, a correction. We don't know the extent to it yet, but it's something that everybody's watching, and it's been when President was out in Ohio, the screen also showed the stock market numbers changing second by second. So there's a lot going on in the one area that he seems to have some positive numbers, and that may be somewhat troublesome for him.
So the January poll that we did with NPR PBS NewsHour had President Trump in his first year in office. People said 44% thought the economy had gotten better, 35% about the same. Good numbers, not amazing numbers. As you mentioned, the ABC News Washington Post poll had actually better numbers about the economy. And then in our same poll that we did with NPR and PBS NewsHour, from the following list, in which area do you feel Trump has had the most impact during his first year in office? The economy is 21%, taxes is 20%. These aren't, incredibly historic numbers in some ways, but they do represent a difference from the way that Americans feel about him in so many other ways. The economy is the one box that they check. And he has not been shy about talking about that. He's not shy about talking about anything on Twitter, right? So one of his tweets, we pulled up a couple of his tweets because, there's about 2 trillion of them about the economy. But he tweeted, if the Dems, crooked Hillary, got elected, your stocks would now be down 50% from values on Election Day. Now they have a great future and just beginning. Words that you might have to eat, some crow you might have to eat there. The stock market and the U.S. dollar are both plunging today. This was in 2012. Welcome to Barack Obama's second term. It is often said that there is not a tweet that you can't find from Donald Trump that disproves exactly what has happened on any given day, and this seems to fit into that. He loves to talk about these things.
Yeah, as we pointed out in the beginning of the segment, with some risk. And so we're going to see. I mean, this is, I think, one that everybody's watching, particularly given the instability of the market right now. Where's it going, and what will the difference be to people's attitudes, positively or negatively, depending on what happens to the president?
Does the historically, when we look back at polls, and we've done polls for a really long time, does the market drive people's opinion of the economy, or do people's opinion of the economy form more by their own pocketbooks, jobs, income, things like that?
I think it's more of a day-to-day experience of what's going on in people's lives now, to the degree that people think of their retirement as in the stock market. I mean, I think that does cause fear and jitters.
And I was just going to jump in and say that there's a concern also. I think the scars of the last recession are just barely healed.
10 years later.
Yeah, so I think there's, when we see what's going on this week, I think there's a little bit of a reaction to, oh my God, are we going down that road again? And clearly the numbers haven't shown that yet, but I think there's that concern.
And politically, this administration seems to have a way of stepping on things that are very positive for them. So, with the first of the year, there were a lot of changes to the tax code, and there's a growing positive feeling about the tax cut. And it just seems that, at every turn, there's some kind of either political distraction or some kind of a debate that's going on that takes away, from any of the policies that they have been moving forward with.
And now for the wonky discussion that we wanted to have. The U.S. Census is something that happens every 10 years. Everybody knows that. They think people go out, they send some surveys around, they knock on doors. You get to figure, here's how many people are in America, here's how many people in your city, and you're done. There is a big debate going on in pollster circles, first and foremost, about a proposed change here. Tell me about this.
Well, every 10 years, we do have a debate about what should be in the census. And the whole idea of the census was that we were supposed to be able to count the inhabitants of the United States. And so how inhabitants gets defined then becomes a political issue rather than just a statistical term. So the questionnaire for this enormous survey that's going to be taking place over the next few years actually has to be completed by the end of March. March 31st is the deadline. So all of these debates need to resolve by that point. And what the Trump administration has been proposing through the Department of Justice is to add questions which have not necessarily been asked in the past, one being citizenship, and whether we should include a question about whether someone is a citizen or not on the census. Certainly there are arguments for doing such a thing because the census is going to determine how political boundaries are going to be defined, congressional districts and other political districts. It's also going to determine how government funding gets dispersed around the country. So depending upon how we define inhabitants and whether they are in fact citizens, will certainly have an impact on both of those things, as well as what a lot of groups have been feeling is kind of the sense that this is another way of targeting immigrants in the United States.
And I think there's where the political rub shows up in all this, because this is not in isolation from what other issues that are being discussed right now in our political circles. And if you add a question about citizenship, the concern by some groups and some advocacy groups is that you're now going to increase the number of refusals among those groups who may find that intimidating or troublesome or worrisome in some manner. And so you're now going to affect who's actually in the census, and then we start that ball rolling down the hill about congressional districts and numbers and the like. So the concern is you're going to be missing people who you might otherwise be counting because of this.
So that's a question that's being proposed to be added. There's a question that's being proposed to be removed, which is about race and ethnicity.
Yes.
And this has raised a firestorm within the organization we're all a part of, the polling American Public Opinion Polling Organization. And the reason for that is that this has been asked for decades and decades, and it has huge implications for understanding who we think we are. The argument on the other side is, on its surface, at least to me, pretty logical, though. It is made by at least one person, Ward Connerly, who is pretty well known as an anti-immigrant person out in California. He ran some a variety of propositions and stuff. But he and another gentleman made a very, I think, reasonable argument. It's on its face in the Washington Post that we are these classifications, Hispanic, Black, Asian, are fairly broad and irrelevant. They're not scientific. I mean, Asian, what does that mean?
And
they divide us, right?
Yes.
And so why can't we just be who we want to be, who we are, and not be put into these kind of false, archaic classifications? On the surface, that seems to make sense, but there's been a pretty strong pushback from our organization.
Yeah, and I think that I think you're very wonky today, in fact, Jay.
Well, there is a history, though,
yes.
As you've alluded to, Lee, of how the race question actually developed.
The irony is that originally, after the Constitution was formed in the country, the race and ethnicity questions served as a basis for discrimination, because not everybody was going to count as a full citizen under that. So we had to know how many people, and there's different numbers about, African Americans.
3/5 of a.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we know numbers about, free people and slaves in New Jersey because of the fact that the census was done. Now the census and those questions, the people are saying, helps us better understand those questions do inequality, so that we know who's where. And if you take those out and you throw the numbers into a sort of a new mix, well, you might get a very more rural sample in the numbers, and that could have political ramifications given the way we know about blue states and red states.
It's not just about the race question; it's also about the citizen question, and I believe also in this new census, people who check the race category of being white will also need to define their ethnicity. So it is a broader move to
meaning what? So I'd have to say Dapper is Belgian.
Exactly.
And on my mother's side, I'm Scotch and Irish and English and and that, and I'm
that becomes.
I do 23andMe. I'm going to come back and figure out I'm actually part of. I mean, aren't we all Genghis Khans?
And you actually may need to do that genetic test to be able to fill out the census. And we're making fun of it, but it is part of a broader change to define who lives in the United States. And I don't think that, we can get caught in the questions and the specificity of, what they mean, but there is a broader issue here of who is going to be counted. Is it going to be all inhabitants? Is it going to be just citizens? There's also a movement to define it as just people who are eligible to vote, thereby discounting anybody who's under the age of 18. And that has a tremendous impact on what we think our country looks like and how we define and look at our states.
So there isn't all this, in a future program, we need to talk about statistical weighting and how that enters into this discussion also, because it does affect the numbers. But right now, groups are arguing back and forth on this, and it's really politically charged. But we know that some people are saying that the census currently is not funded to the extent it needs to be. that we're already behind schedule. And some of these arguments suggest that perhaps we might end up with a situation, as Barbara alluded to, where there's an undercounting of minorities and immigrants.
And it's an undermining of science.
Yeah.
And I think that is really the bigger issue here. We've really seen a move to undermine science and numbers and statistics across government agencies. And I think that our own professional association, the American Association for Public Opinion Researchers, as well as other statistical groups and federal agencies that monitor and scientifically measure what we know to be our country, are feeling this strain and constraint on being able to define who we are, not just anecdotally, but quantitatively.
So let's move from science to sports and talk about the Olympics being held in South Korea, Winter Olympics, not far from the border with North Korea. As we know, North Korea, one of the hottest of the hot spots in the world right now. And you got to think that there is risk of some sort. And we asked people about that.
Yes. And, 60% of American in our latest Marist poll said that they were concerned, either very or a good deal, for the safety of American athletes at the Winter Olympics. And more than half, 53%, were concerned about specifically a terrorist attack disrupting the games.
And I think the history, of the Olympics, unfortunately, also has tragic examples in Munich, in Atlanta, where we had, and others, I suspect, that come to mind, where there have been disruptions, violence, death, and those are the kinds of things when you put that into the equation and you put it into South Korea. You now have to say, well, this may be, in fact, a moment of concern, and we're getting away from the sport of it and into the politics.
It's interesting, though, because the Olympics in this case have also been this remarkable moment where the South Korean president has made this great rapprochement with North Korea in bringing the athletes together. Sport is being used in the kind of traditional sense of bringing the world together.
Which is what the Olympics is supposed to be.
It's supposed to be about, and it's actually kind of happening in this case, even though most South Koreans, especially young South Koreans, hate it. The public opinion polls there, they hate what their liberal, it's a liberal president, right? I think.
Yeah.
What he
wants to negotiate.
Yeah, and they actually hate that, and they hate the fact that the North Korean swimmers are on the same, or not, that would be the Summer Olympics, skiers, whatever it is, skaters? I don't remember what it is.
Skiers.
Yeah. They're on the same team.
And don't forget curling.
And curling. But they're on the
always
same,
a favorite.
The North Koreans are on the same with the South Koreans, and they hate that. So it's really interesting that Americans fear there's going to be a terrorist attack. There is, at the same time, this odd occurrence of there actually being the Olympics used to bring people together, and then the people in the country where it's happening don't like it. It just seems like this is an odd Olympics in a very hot place.
Welcome to Earth.
That will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and we'd like to thank Mary Griffith, our wonderful executive producer. And we'd also like to thank the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University, who provides us with the ability to look back in time at survey questions and results over the decades.
And if you want us to be very wonky, let us know. Send us some questions at pollhub@marist.edu. We'll be as wonky as you want.
And we get wonky on social media, too, sometimes. On Twitter, @MaristPoll. Also, we're on Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram. Don't forget, I'll get it out. Don't forget to subscribe. And also, you can just tell your smart speaker, hey, Alexa, play Poll Hub. And if she's listening, and you can talk better than I can, apparently, today, she will play us back, and you'll get to listen.